Sego, hello there. In today's video I'm going to be trying a little experiment. I'm going to go for a walk in the snow in my approximation of traditional clothing. It's about -10 or so it's cold but not ridiculously cold. It is however quite windy, so I'm just going to go for a walk and see how long I can stand it. First however, let me go over what I'm wearing. Now, I said approximation of traditional clothing for two reasons. One, I don't have the right leather or furs, and two, not a lot is known about Iroquoian clothing prior to the mid-1700s. So some of this stuff is speculative or a little bit wrong. So to start with, on my feet I've got some high-cuffed moccasins made of buffalo leather. For insulation, I've stuffed them with scraps of rabbit fur. I speculate that rabbit skin socks like these might have been used, but I can't prove it. Stuffed with scraps is what the early writers talk about, so that's what we're going with. The leather for the moccasins is probably wrong. It should probably be moose skin and traditionally tanned like these ones. On the legs, I've got a pair of deerskin leggings. The style of these is improvisational, but they are made of traditional leather, so they're pretty close. Above that, I've got a breechcloth of modern tanned deerskin. On my torso, I'm wearing a tunic of modern tanned deerskin. This is an approximation of a historical style. I have no idea how close it is. On top of that, I've got a coat made of moose skin and trimmed with rabbit fur. This is again an approximation of the historical style based on surviving coats from other cultures, as well as an illustration of a Huron coat. Though it has trim, the coat itself is unlined, being just a single layer of moose skin. On top of the coat there is a mantle of sealskin. This is again speculative. A lot of modern regalia features a heavily beaded cloth mantle. I'm assuming it had a practical purpose back in the day. On my hands I've got a pair of mittens. These are backed with sealskin, lined with rabbit, and have a palm of deer. Sealskin was used, but it would be more common for beaver or muskrat to be the backing. However, it should be from a different type of seal. On my head I've got a 6-panel cap made of sealskin lined with rabbit. Again, it should probably be beaver or muskrat, but this is what I have. We've got a number of 6-panel caps surviving from the 1800s, and this illustration shows something similar. So now that the preamble is out of the way, let's get started. Setting out, a drawback to leggings quickly becomes apparent. These leggings reach up higher than most historical examples. Even so, at the hip there's a ring of skin about an inch wide where the top of the leggings do not cover. This portion of the leg being covered only by the hem of the tunic and the overcoat. Back in the day, a common item of clothing was a kilt. Maybe that's a key article of clothing that I've neglected. Or maybe it wouldn't be a problem at all if it wasn't such a windy day. Either way, nothing to do but press on and see if it becomes unbearable. The wind chill is something I want to talk about here. When I'm wearing something like a heavy knit sweater, it's wind chill that always gets me. Thick wool is warm as can be, but if the wind is strong enough it just blows through all the holes in the fabric and sucks the heat right out of you. Leather by itself is not particularly insulative, but what it does very well is stop airflow. This works both ways. The heavy moosehide coat is able to just stop the wind chill dead in its tracks, but it also creates a bubble of warm air around the body. Any heat that I lose has to conduct through the leather itself. Now if I were only wearing one layer of leather, this would not be enough. With one layer directly in contact with the skin, the leather would just conduct the heat out of my body. But with 2 layers, in the tunic and the overcoat, I've got 2 bubbles of air around my torso. So rather than everything normalizing, the tunic stays warm and the overcoat stays cold. It works surprisingly well for no real insulation. It was shortly thereafter that the weather took a turn for the worse. This is a lesson I'm continually learning about winter, is that it can change very quickly. If you're going to be traveling more than a few minutes away from home, you need to be prepared for the worst. Because even though the odds are that it's not going to change too much, if it does, it can be very bad for you very quickly. One winter I was out for a walk, and it was a fairly mild day. I had on a wool toque, a wool scarf, and a wool hood. It was bright and sunny, not too cold, not much wind. Then the weather changed suddenly. It was really strong wind, the kind of wind that's hard to stand up in. I dug a nice toasty snow shelter into the side of a bank, curled up in there to wait it out, but after a couple of hours of just sitting there, it seemed like it wasn't ever going to go away. And home was only about a half hour away, so I pulled my hat down under my hood, wrapped my scarf all the way around my head a couple of times to keep everything nice and warm. 3 or 4 layers of good thick wool around my ears. And I walk, keeping my head down in the wind, and I get home in good time. I get to the mirror and my ear is just burning. I unwrap the scarf, take off my hood, and I look in the mirror and it's bright red like a tomato, and it's about a half an inch thick, the rim of the ear. There's an old saying that whatever doesn't kill you makes you stronger. Well, frostbite is one of the exceptions to that rule. It ruptures all the little blood vessels in the damaged tissue, making it more susceptible to cold. It doesn't have the same level of blood circulation. You're more likely to get frostbite in the future. It is for this reason that I'm skeptical of all of these historical accounts that describe Iroquoians in winter as going around just wearing moccasins and a fur robe. No mitts, no hat, no leggings, no shirt, just a robe. No, Mr. Champlain, I'm afraid you're mistaken. Winter doesn't work that way. The snowshoes were doing their job very well, so I took them off to give the moccasins more of a test, see how they fare on their own. The cuffs are lashed fairly tightly to the leggings, and they're doing their job at keeping the snow out of the top. However, I should have used sinew to sew them rather than leather cord. Every now and then a bit of snow slips in through one of the holes. Not enough to be bad, but just enough to be annoying. It also confirms my suspicion that rabbit skin socks would be a heck of a lot better than just scraps of rabbit skin. There were a couple of spots where the rabbit skin didn't cover. These spots got quite cold. The rest of my feet were toasty warm though. Aside from the gap at the top, the leggings are doing quite well. They're about as warm as a pair of heavy work pants, and like the coat, they stop the wind chill dead in its tracks. The mittens are warm as can be. They're really doing their job. It's not for nothing that fur mittens are still quite common. My face and neck are getting cold, so I'm going to step into the woods here and just get out of the wind a little bit. This will also let me talk about another reason why it's important to overdress in winter. Because it's one thing to be toasty warm while you're out exercising, but it's another thing entirely to be toasty warm while you're taking a little rest. Kneeling here, I found another shortcoming with the leggings. Once again, it has to do with the gap. If I kneel here, the heat conducting through the leggings is going to melt the snow and get the leggings all wet. If I were to simply squat, it would angle the hem of the tunic and the hem of the coat, such that the hip would be directly exposed to the air. The hat is doing its job very well, but it doesn't quite offer enough coverage for comfort. The bottom of my earlobe sticks out from underneath it. It also leaves my cheeks and my neck completely exposed. A design with ear flaps would be a heck of a lot better, but we don't have any surviving examples or artwork, so therefore I guess it's impossible that anyone historically could have thought of that. One thing it's doing quite well is staying dry. With a knit toque, the snow lands on it, sticks, and gradually melts, eventually making the toque all wet. Here, the snow that does stick doesn't melt very fast, and what does melt runs off the side. The mantle is also doing its job here. You can see that quite a bit of snow is stuck to it. Because the shoulder is relatively flat, it collects a lot more snow than the rest of the body, which mostly just falls off. Because the shoulder is the only part of the coat that's in constant contact with my body, the shoulder is also the part of the coat that loses the most heat through the material. Over time, this heat would melt the snow and give me wet shoulders, which would not be so good. The mantle does a pretty good job at stopping all of this. Even if it were just a layer of leather without any fur, it would still go a long ways. Well, I can't sit around forever. Let's get moving again. It was noticeably colder when resting, but not too bad. I wouldn't want to have sat still for more than an hour, though. Moving about in the trees here makes me glad I took off my snowshoes. They're invaluable out in the open, but here with all these dead branches to step over, they're a bit of a pain. The moccasins have done pretty well at resisting the wet. They're not getting damp at all. This would be very different if it were a little bit warmer. +1 in traditional shoes is a lot worse than -5 in traditional shoes. Too cold for my feet to melt the snow. Well, once more onto the breach, I guess. It really is impressive how good the clothes are at stopping the wind. One of the things that helps with this is the fur trim around the coat and the end of the mittens. Without the trim, the wind would blow straight through the opening in the center. When I wear untrimmed mittens, I always end up with icy wrists. It also helps a great deal with creating an air bubble. The air currents draw the warm air towards the hem of the coat, but then the fur trim just deflects it back inside. The clothes have fared very well so far, but the weather's just getting worse and I don't want to push my luck, so I'm going to head back. The clothes fared very well overall. A couple of shortcomings I want to talk about. The combination of tunic and coat did very well, but if the ambient temperature were very much colder, say -25, I would have needed at least another layer. Or, better yet, a coat with a liner. The leggings did very well, but the one that I knelt on got a little bit wet. Not bad for a couple of hours, but if I'd had to be out here all day, it would have developed into an issue. The gap at the top of the leggings was annoying, but I don't think it's a major issue. There's enough blood flow to the legs that I don't think you'd get frostbite there unless you were already in a really bad way. Maybe a kilt should have been worn, but I'd imagine someone could just tough it out. The biggest issue was the short coverage of the hat. My earlobes and neck got very cold. I had to put my hands over them in the last part of the walk to keep them warm. I would assume that there must have been either a hood or something like an ushanka. There are some things that no amount of conditioning will help you endure. That's the frustrating thing. We know something must have existed, but we don't know what it looked like. Anyway, that's all I have to say for today. Just a fun little experiment. Thank you for watching, and I hope you found this interesting. Goodbye.